Hi, and welcome to Serenity Now, a place for entrepreneurs to ask questions, learn, get connected, and be inspired. Join us as we talk about all things business and the search for the ever-elusive Serenity Now in both business and personal life.
Peggy, why should we listen to this episode today?
Well, if you haven't been involved in a family business and you were wanting to get into one, Ken will absolutely have the answers for you. He gave us 12, well, maybe 13 or 14 solid pieces of advice, learned the hard way through how many years of business? 30 years of business. So I would say listen and learn.
Ken, why should we listen to this episode today?
I'm a family man and I love family business. And so if you're planning or thinking of getting into a family business, plan well, like really know what you're getting yourself into. And it can be wonderful. If you don't plan well, it can be very, very difficult. It's a great way to tear a family apart. And please don't do that.
Welcome to this episode of Serenity Now for Entrepreneurs. I'm so pleased to introduce Ken Falk of Fraser Valley Specialty Poultry. He is not only a serial entrepreneur, but he's also a part of a family group of businesses and a great friend of Peggy's. So I'd love Peggy to give a little more of an introduction around how she got to know Ken and the connection that they have. Peggy?
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, so Ken and I met at the McKay Business Forums when I was at Deloitte, and we were part of a business group. So as you know, with business groups, you kind of get a chance to, bear it all and talk about the things that are hardest in your business and things that you get inspiration from others about, those kind of things. And one thing I came to learn about Ken is he had this very deep-seated, rooted family. And part of that family was this large group of businesses they had at the time, 3 or 4 different businesses, including a specialty poultry, which, by the way, if you're on your way to Cultus Lake, has great chicken. I'm telling you, best chicken I've ever had. Anyhow, so Ken had his share of ups and downs and joys, all of the above coming from the family. And I thought today it would be great to have Ken talk to us about some of the things he's learned, because he's sort of at the end of his career and the succession to the next generation, and how he can, help them maybe avoid some of the things that he found challenging in a family business. So I'd love to hear more about that, Ken. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, about the business, where it is now, and then we can get right into the heart and soul of this family.
Well, thank you very much, Peggy. And yes, we had a great time together at McKay CEO Forums, and I just remember those days fondly. And thank you, all of you, for the invitation to speak to you today. It's just a pleasure to talk about something that's been part of my life as long as I can remember. That's family business. So who am I? Husband to Iris, my wife, near to 45 years of marriage, and 5 grown children, all married to just wonderful spouses. 13 grandchildren, ranging in age from 17 years of age to our last one was born exactly a week ago today.
Oh, congratulations.
And, little Josie Rose. And so, my oldest grandson is working on the farm now, so he would be 5th generation farmer in Canada. Wow. So family business, love it or hate it, and it depends on who you ask and, more importantly, when you ask.
Right.
Because we go through the ups and downs, right? So few businesses survive beyond the second generation, and it depends on the statistics. I mean, it's sobering, quite frankly. Families don't always get along, and they're just not structured to survive. And so I think if we can do a better job of structuring them, then the getting along can be done easier as well. Just a little bit of history. My grandfather was a Mennonite settler who they were chased out of Siberia by the Bolsheviks many, many, many years ago, and landed in Abbotsford. And he farmed everything there, chickens and hogs and fruits and vegetables, and landed ultimately on raspberries. And so that's the generation ahead of me. My dad and his family were involved in that, and also in some grain farming up in the Dawson Creek, Peace River country area. Grandpa was also a builder. He was self-taught out of necessity, because back then you just did everything. So he had a lumber yard, and he just did a whole bunch of things, and so the family was very engaged along the way there. We went to the Dawson Creek area to grain farm because it was the land of opportunity. Land was so cheap, and my goodness, Dad and his brothers, and they were young, and so they went up there and they farmed until they had no money left. and then moved back. Yeah, basically that's it. There's the joke that says, how do you make a small fortune in farming? Yeah, you start with a large one, and you farm until it's gone. So they moved back to Abbotsford and picked up in the construction business, built lots and lots of farm buildings. And so also we're involved in agriculture still. We had an egg farm at that time. Eventually in the Peace Country, we kept some land there and built a substantial hog operation up there. And that, again, we farmed until there was no money left. And then ultimately, the banks come along and the bank said, well, you know what, we don't think there's any value in your hog operation, so we're just going to shut your construction business down. So that was in the mid 80s because of the high interest rates. And so they shut the golden goose down, and they left us with this big hole in the ground, a hog farm in Dawson Creek. Anyway, lesson learned, never trust banks. It's just the way it is. I'm sorry to say it, but that's just the way it is, right? Yeah, we were in the construction business and development and so on. So, but I had this customer out here in Yarrow, and he was a duck farmer. And we built a building for him in record time, and we got his birds in the barn, and he was so pleased. And so I worked for him, or our construction company worked for him for about 10 years, and just building one thing after another. And I was consulting for him as well at the time. I consulted with labor and with environment, with meat inspection and so on. He was a little bit volatile. He was a wonderful man, but he got angry quickly. And so some of these regulators were difficult to deal with. And so I just worked with all of these regulators for him. So one day he said, I'd like to package my business for sale, and would you help me? So of course I'd love to help you. So we set it up for sale, and the appraisals and the business valuations done. And then we approached a potential buyer, and the buyer was supposed to call at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, let's say. Well, 10:15 rolled around, and the owner phoned me, and he said, this man's not a man of his word. He didn't call me. And so the only person I'll sell to is you, he said. Oh, I had never contemplated that. So we started that process of buying this business. And
so that's the farm out in Yarrow where you operate now? Okay.
That's
and
right.
That was in the 80s?
That was in the later 90s.
Later 90s. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the origin of the Fraser Valley Poultry then.
That's right. We took over in 1998 here. So we continued to work in the construction business and in the wholesale marketing business and a number of other businesses. I joke around once, even to the point of having a little pet crematorium in Mission that we were running at the time. And so it was just a collection of things that we were doing, and it was really good. Like, we had some very, very good years.
Ken, when you say we, are you talking yourself, or were there other family members involved at that point?
There was other family members. I have two sisters and their husbands, and
right.
So we were active in the business. Mom and Dad were very active in the business then as well.
So
there was 8 of us.
A bunch of you already. Okay, good.
Yeah, there was 8 of us, and we had our ups and downs. For 25 years or so that we've been involved in the poultry business here, we had various bouts of avian influenza, the most recent of which was last year, and was very difficult. Right. We diversified into the chicken industry, and that was a hard process. Meat inspection the regulators are difficult. It's a highly regulated business.
Right.
And then COVID was very difficult. We're predominantly food service. And so when all the restaurants shut down,
wow.
food service becomes quite difficult. So
let's talk about the heart of it here. Let's talk about that family side of the business. You talked about your parents and your siblings and their spouses being involved in the business. How do you get there? Who does what? How do you know who's the boss? Who makes the decisions? This is what I'm interested in, because it's such a different dynamic than any one of our businesses where we're the boss, right?
Right. It is a very different dynamic. I identified 12 lessons learned, and we won't not get through them all, but I thought we could go through the list and we can dig deeper into ones that are of particular interest.
I love that you're so organized. Holy cool.
So Peggy, you and I have talked about this, about planning your exit before you enter.
Yeah. And plan your way out before you plan your way in.
Yeah. In family business, in my mind, it is more important than in any other business that you plan both your entry and your exit.
Rita really likes that word, succession planning.
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah, very excited as we walk through this.
Yeah, it's like family business. Like you're all in. You're invested entirely, and so to get out is very difficult. There's not a lot of cash necessarily for buyouts because you're growing the business. And frankly, it can get very emotional when one sibling says to another, well, you know what, I just don't want to work with you anymore. There's a dynamic there that may go back to childhood. And so,
and Sunday dinners become very difficult then.
well, that's the next one is how do you separate business from family? And it's a minefield. There's this sibling rivalry piece that is always there. I knew you when, and so don't tell me what to do. Or
a parent never stopping to be a parent, even though the child's higher up in the rankings than the parent.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So, family gathering tables tend to become boardroom tables, and the emotional crap, can I use that word?
Sure.
Gets dumped all over the boardroom table, the family gathering table sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's really hard, So external resources, that's the way through as far as I'm concerned, is to bring people in to help you.
Like some sort of a family business consultant.
For sure. Yeah. And it can be an accountant, it can be a lawyer, it can be preferably somebody who is very plugged into family dynamics. So, because it's not just about numbers and legal issues. There is the family dynamic that you want to be concerned about.
Candace will tell you, hey, Candace, that you're sometimes a counselor as well, hey?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think a psychology degree would have made me even more successful.
I often wished I had that because I failed miserably many, many times as I've worked through this process. So
I would argue that the family understanding and working with and managing that family dynamic in a family business is probably even more important than the numbers and the legal.
I would agree with that 100%.
Because if you can't get that sorted out, you can't get any of the other stuff sorted out.
So leadership and succession. So typically these family businesses are founded by a patriarch or a matriarch, but in our case, patriarchs. And they have the first word and the last word, and they're rarely challenged. We honor our parents, and so we live by what they say. And we did, and it was really good. Both mom and dad, they're just awesome people. We lost dad in 2014, but they were just really, really awesome people. But the successor, the next in line, is difficult, particularly if that successor is going to be a sibling, and then they've risen up through the ranks. Just because they seem to be the natural successor doesn't mean that the siblings will support them.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so it's just very difficult.
So Ken, what you're saying there, Hugh, is it's not like an earned position as much as it's a born into position.
Inherited almost, yeah.
Inherited almost, and it's not a good thing. Like it might be a good thing, but it might not. And so again, bringing some external resources around that is, in my view, is really important. And
I would imagine, yeah.
We did do that, but we didn't do it enough. And so it can create huge family conflict if you don't get it right. Leadership by family committee is a dismal failure.
Leadership by committee, period, is a dismal failure.
Yeah, I agree with that comment.
It's horrible, and everybody wants to have a say, and that's really good. But knowing when to have a say and when to just say nothing, you got to have the wisdom of Solomon to know that. And I don't pretend to have that. So best is that you build into a shareholders agreement, which we'll get to in a minute, the way that a leader is chosen and the way that a leader is removed.
So that's something that would be like in addition to what most of us see in a shareholders agreement, right?
Right.
Okay.
And so that spills over into, I've called it a family agreement, but let's start with a shareholders agreement first. And that is, in my mind, they're more important in a family business than they are in any other business because, again, everybody has an opinion. Everybody wants a say. And so there needs to be pretty strong guidelines, guide rails, guideposts that say, okay, here's what we're going to do and here's what we're not going to do as we move our business forward.
So I'm just going to take a quick step back, Ken.
Sure.
And I love how you kind of break everything out in nice pieces that are easily manageable, though not at all when you're actually living it.
Right.
But just so that everybody's well aware, what's a shareholders agreement? I just want to make sure. that
A
we've got
shareholder,
that defined?
sure. A shareholders agreement is a document that we have all agreed upon that we're going to conduct ourselves in a certain way. That here's the way the company is structured, and here's how we're going to live within it. And if we don't, the time to agree on that is before you even get into it.
When you're all
And
happy together.
when you're all happy, it is so nice when you're all happy together and you come to agreement on these things. And that doesn't mean that document is etched in stone, but it can't be just changed on a whim. You have to come together and agree on some of those guardrails and those business principles and those values that are absolutely critical to finding that pathway forward.
So it's kind of like a roadmap for the family.
It
Gives
is
you a
very
bit,
much.
yeah, it gives you a little bit of defining, a little bit of understanding. Like you said, there's a little bit of room to maneuver around as needed, but it
Right.
does get reviewed annually, and it has to be filed annually as well.
And I would strongly support that. Now, having said that, we didn't do a great job in our family business. And going forward, I want to do a much better job as I move the company to the next generation. Then the family agreement. These are rarely done, in my view. They're as important as the shareholders agreement. This deals more with some of the family dynamic pieces to really unpack what is involved in a particular family and how that's going to impact your way forward. And in fact, when you explore that, you may decide, I don't think we can really be in business together.
Wow.
You know,
So for my benefit, because I've never dealt with a family agreement, what do you cover there? Like, what is a family agreement about?
well, yeah, I'd start with values. I'd start with
Oh, okay.
really
Just as you would in a business, create a set
it-
of of values for your
right.
family business. Okay.
But they probably run deeper. Like in our case, because we're people of faith, it would run into our faith lives and some of our core beliefs, who we are.
Hmm.
And, for the most part, I think we can agree on that. But then just talking about some of the family dynamics that have happened over the years. And this takes somebody that, we talked about having a counselor.
Hmm.
This takes somebody to help a family unpack that and really understand what our responses, our reactions, what are our trigger points going to be, and how do we work through that when there are those family trigger points. I know a really good family company in Toronto and the Toronto area, and there's sisters that run the company, and they go away for sisters weekends. And they unpack a lot of some of the difficult family dynamic stuff on these weekends. And I thought that's a really good way to go. They've brought external resources in to help them walk through this so that they can unpack it in healthy ways. And
Instead of
so
it's sitting there and festering amongst the group, right?
that's right. That's right.
Because
So
even if you try to say, I'm going to have a family agreement at the beginning of the life of the business, typically everybody, just like the beginning of a marriage, you're at honeymoon, right? We're all excited, and well,
yes,
I'm not going to disagree. Oh yeah, 100%, I'm with you. I mean, none of that stuff. What they did over there, it's not going to happen to us.
right.
And then inevitably even worse will happen, right? So it's fantastic you're walking through some of these, what I call basics, but to others may not be basics.
Right.
It's hard to get so many people to agree on.
It is. And again, when it's patriarchal, it's pretty easy. But the next generation becomes more difficult. And then the one after that will be even more difficult.
Why was
So,
that?
well, you've got now the business as seen through the lenses of the shareholders of a particular generation. And they may not feel that they have been fairly treated. And those attitudes will get passed on to the next generation. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody but myself here. I talk to my kids about family business, and I'm seeing it through my lens.
Right.
And my siblings will see it through their lens.
Hmm.
And so we see things differently. And that's okay. That's people.
Yeah, and that's good. Diversity is good, right?
That's right.
So you continue with your list, Ken. What else you got
Okay.
on there?
Shareholders who are leaders must have job descriptions. Well, everybody should have job descriptions, but in particular, anybody who's been appointed or accepted a leadership role. External value evaluations of those job descriptions are critical. Sibling
Oh.
reviews are emotional nightmares and just should be avoided, in my view, at all cost. I have stumbled over that one, and I confess I've done it poorly. And so you need to have an external resource come in and do that review for you. They can be objective, and sometimes siblings can't be objective, or they
Or
find it
even
very,
if you're objective, there's biases there, right?
there is. And just because you're a family member doesn't guarantee you a job. It shouldn't. You need to be qualified for a particular job. It needs to be kind of in your wheelhouse, or you'd better not get into it, because you're going to fail. And now you've got a family dynamic that's going to get ugly.
Mm-hmm.
So,
trying to hire a family member is one thing, or bringing a family member on board is one thing. Trying to fire a family member, that's a whole different cat. And I've been involved in all of these areas of supporting and setup, and I'm usually the third party to this. So what you're saying today, Ken, is just resonating so well. And I think there's already so many golden nuggets you've already shared and passed on, that people hopefully will be able to take a deep breath before they walk into some of this stuff. But I think one of the most important things you said a little earlier was maybe when you start looking down and reviewing some of these agreements and understanding, you might make that decision to step out completely.
right.
And I think that's a very honorable thing to do, even though a lot of people might get upset and angry. But because I've seen the other side of it, try to clean up the other side of it, I always start with why did you come in anyways? And it's not an offensive question. It really is truthful, trying to ask, why did you want to start?
So next generations often, even if they're not shareholders now, but they're the children of shareholders, they often expect that they're going to have a job within the company, and it's going to be a leadership role. And it just can't be that way. You can't assume that. That doesn't mean they can't have a job, but that means that they need to fit into positions that they're qualified for, and that they have the aptitude for, and that they're passionate about. And so
Do you start them all at the bottom, Ken? Do you make them work their way up through the company?
Well, I look at my oldest son, Joe. He started working with his grandfather on the property here in 1998, and he has literally done every job that is required on this farm. I never had that benefit. I walked into it as an adult child owner. I was 39 years old when we bought this operation.
Wow.
And so when Joe has stepped in now as the leader, I can honestly say that I have absolute confidence that he can run this business better than I ever could, because he's experienced so much more than I have.
Right.
But there have been challenges with my kids and my siblings' kids along the way. And there's some families that say, well, you can't work in the family business until you've gone out in the real world and spent 5 years working out there, and then you can come back.
That's a good strategy.
Yeah, now you can bring back your training and you get your job based on merit and so on. We never did that, but I think there's merit in doing that.
Right. That's good.
So another piece that I see is that family owners must insist on professional development for family leaders. Instead of it being sort of a bit of a hardship, well, I don't know if I want to pay the bill to have this leader have some professional development. Maybe it's not fair, or maybe I want that too, but we need to insist on it. Sometimes there can be a difficult competitive sort of environment or a spirit that sadly almost wants a sibling leader to fail, because you can say, see, I told you weren't good enough. And we all have it. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. It's just a sad reality. We're siblings first and business partners and owners second, right? And so I love my family. I love them to pieces. But, these things exist. And
you
even
used
if
to
only...
pinch your brother, right?
Yeah. Even if only in our subconscious they exist, right? That rivalry piece, right?
Yeah.
So we have hired lots of external management and so on in the company. And we have had to be very careful as we've done that, because they know that they're at a disadvantage in a family company. Oftentimes, a family is advanced prior to an external manager. So it's really hard for retention. It's really hard to attract that top talent, and it's really hard to keep them. So we have to rationalize that in our own minds, that no, this is not a family position. We don't have a candidate that really fits that role. So we're going to need to bring somebody in. And, you have to justify it to some degree, where in a non-family business, you wouldn't have to justify it. You would just say, well, we don't have anybody to rise up from the ranks, so we're going to bring somebody in.
At some point, Ken, do you say to yourselves, instead of saying the words family business, do you just say business? And, how does that play out?
That would be wonderful in an ideal world.
I think
Yeah.
so too.
Yeah, because you can't get away from it when
No.
you're sibling owners, and we love each other and we get along in so many respects, but everybody's got their lens and how they look at the business, and so I think we're better off to acknowledge it's a family business, nothing hidden. It is what it is, and you find ways of working through it.
I asked the question and you did make me chuckle, and I wanted to say it simply because a lot of the transitions we've worked through, at some point they try to say, you know what, let's just call it a business. And
Yeah.
then they go through that for transition for about a year. And then they go back and go, it is what it is.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is what it is, and,
Yeah.
I got to call it for what it really is. But there comes a point in time typically where somebody has to try it. And
Right.
then they go, we know we're not corporate. We're not this. We're not we're back to family,
Yeah.
But they've got to go through that process to see it. So
That's right. That's my opinion. Another lesson that we've learned is sometimes parent or sibling owners, they may want to get involved in fighting battles for their kids.
Oh,
Their
yeah.
kids are in the business, they're working in the business, and it might be things like wages or workplace conflict or different things that are happening. And so parents want to get involved. And just a cautionary tale, I have to say our business ran fairly smoothly in this regard, but I have seen it happen. And I had to be reminded of just saying, hold it a minute. We've got a manager in place there. And the worst thing we can do is saddle some poor manager with a family member that's got a bad attitude. And so we've got to make sure that our family, our kids understand that they can't have a bad attitude at work. That just doesn't work at all. So yeah, it's challenging, but okay. The last point that I wanted to get 12, and so I got 12. I could go on and on, but the last one is this: when a family member does exit the business, which is really hard to do, but let's say they do, the exited family member can feel left behind because the business continues to do its thing and it might grow quickly. Dad and mom are still invested in the business, so it seemed like they are still supporting those remaining shareholder siblings. But the one that's exited, well, they got what they got, and that's it. It's done. Again, just a caution for us as parents in these relationships to make sure that our kids feel equally supported, whether they're ultimately shareholders in the business or not. Now, I focused
Wow.
on a bunch of maybe negative things. I don't know if it's negative as much as it's just reality.
I think it's learning, Ken. That's what you've learned, right?
It is. It is. So there are
Is
so
it?
many good things in family business, though, too. So.
Hmm. Yeah, well, your family's been an example of that. You guys are such a big, strong family and so close still.
Yeah, and we've really tried to continue to foster that. I'll say though, honestly, it's not always easy. And
No.
recently, my wife and I have bought out my siblings. So Iris and I own the company now, and so now we're able to pass it on to the next generation. And I'm not waiting. We're on the move. We're making this happen. So over the next, I'll say 5 or 7 years, I expect that the transition and ownership will take place. The succession in leadership has already taken place. I come to work every day, but
Hmm.
I spend my days working on some charity work that I'm involved in. We've got a really nice, a wonderful charity cares for the vulnerable in our city here called Ruth and Naomi's, and so I'm very involved there. I'm involved with our church, and just for fun,
Awesome.
I started a car collection, and
Oh, pretty nice.
yeah, it's been fun, and I love doing woodwork, but I just haven't found time yet in this excessively busy semi-retirement phase of my life. But I
That's
am living the
awesome,
dream.
Ken.
I got to say, I'm living the dream. So
That's just great. I'm really glad you shared all that with us. And there's lots to be learned about family business. And that was pretty good, 12 really good points, I have to say.
So we'll
yeah,
go into the quickfire section now, Ken, where
okay,
we'll either chime in with insights that we've learned from you today and echo, what resonated with us, or if we want to add to the list of 12. I've been listening very intently because I've been on the side of being an in-law married into a family business, as well as being fourth generation Chinese entrepreneur in Canada. And so just fascinated with the lessons that you've shared with us today. So I'm happy to go first. And I will say something that I learned from today that really resonated is that job description piece. And I would also add having KPIs or key performance indicators added to those responsibilities to level the playing field and say, if you are a family member, you still play by these same rules that everybody else does. And so I just wanted to add that in there. Maybe one other minor thing is, maybe minor, the hierarchy in the family is not necessarily the hierarchy at work.
That is so true.
Yeah.
So true.
That's awesome.
Peggy?
I really like the piece about the family agreement. I hadn't really considered that. I mean, in a business, we often write our goals and our values and things like that, but it would really have a bit of a deeper, maybe more emotional, if you want to say, piece to it than the regular business plan would. So I think that family agreement is really important. And I think rehashing it over time, especially as generations change, would be a really good thing to do, because as we know, our kids don't do what we do. They don't think the way we think. And that next generation has their own piece to offer it. So yeah, that was a really good piece from my perspective.
I think I'm going to be on those same lines as well. So like at a higher level, I think people in a family business might be tempted to think that documentation isn't as important. But I would argue that it's probably even more important. The deeper the emotions, the more important that documentation, because then it, the shareholders agreement, the family agreement, the job descriptions, it just gives everybody the same thing to go back to rather than the in the moment feelings. I think that the deeper the emotions run, the more important that documentation is. So I think that's what resonated with me the most today.
And Rita?
I always agree with my sisters. But a couple of things really kind of hit hard, which was one, Ken, you were very vulnerable in sharing a lot of things. And I don't know if many people kind of have heard some of these vulnerable pieces that you've shared today. So I think that's huge. And then putting it into kind of a 12-step program, maybe we're going to have you, run a program with us shortly. I think that was fantastic. For me, the biggest pieces are the plan your way in and plan your way out, which I love, love, love. And the other piece of it is having regular meetings, even though you're already family, even though you're already in the business, and people are going to say, oh my gosh, well, because of every time we work with any family business, those regular meetings, even though you might get a bit squirrely, I watch your reactions. And what happens is that the next month's meeting, that reaction's there again. And then maybe by the third month, you're feeling safe enough to say something. But if we didn't have those regular meetings, a year goes by. Yes. And so I think that's my one little tidbit or piece of advice. But otherwise, thank you so much, Ken. Thanks, Peggy, for bringing Ken in.
Yeah, wonderful to have you, Ken.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you today. Can I say just one more thing?
Yes, one more thing from Ken.
Or it might be two. One is about the family meetings. I think that's so important. And so in my generation, we didn't do a great job of that. We met from time to time, but not on any kind of a rhythm. And I would really encourage that there be a rhythm. And as our son Joe has taken leadership, he has set up that rhythm. And it's been so good. As a sibling leader now, it's critical. And we start with family updates. And so each family can talk about their sort of what's going on in their life and some personal things. And so that's so important. The last thing I'd like to say is, and this wasn't maybe it is a lesson learned. So it might be 13. The business as a family business does not have to survive. It's not imperative. If family starts struggling, maybe it's time to sell. Maybe it's time just to get out. A family businesses, we think they have to survive generation after generation after generation. That's wonderful if that can work, but they don't have to. And so, I've said to my kids, once I turn it over to you, it's up to you whether or not you want to run it on, and I'm not standing in the way. You do what you want to do, whatever works for you and your generation. That's just great. Nobody can feel trapped. I feel like oftentimes in family businesses, people feel trapped. It's just not a good feeling.
That's a great closing point.
Love it. Well, thank you, Ken, for joining the Serenity Sisters today. We've learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners will get a lot of nuggets of wisdom from this episode on family business, succession planning, on how to work together as a team. And so thank you again for joining us today.
And thank you very much. And hope to see you again.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and picked up some good tips and best practices that would benefit your entrepreneurial journey. Remember, none of the content in this podcast should be relied upon as standard legal or business advice. Always consult a professional for your specific business. You may know someone who could benefit from this podcast. Please share it with your business community, and perhaps it can give an entrepreneur you know some serenity now.